Hello, this is Randy Ruggie, and I am, this is September 1st of 2023. I am with the Nebraska Veteran Memorial Foundation Share Your Story Project. Bellevue University is a sponsor of the Nebraska Veteran Memorial Foundation Park Project, and I am at Bellevue, Nebraska at the Bellevue University Military Veteran Service Center with Army veteran Charles Chuck Cooper, who has agreed to share his story with the Library of Congress Veterans History Project and the Nebraska Vietnam Memorial Project. Let's go ahead and begin. If you can introduce yourself.
My name is Chuck Cooper. I am 79 years old. I am a veteran of Vietnam from 1968, returning in 1969. Strikes me that that's 54 years ago. I am married with 3 adult children. Both my wife and I still are active. I'm presently hospital services coordinator at the Veterans Hospital here in Omaha. We have cars. I work with the DAV, or for the DAV, and we bring in all of those veterans who otherwise would not get to their medical appointments or be able to come in for visits to service officers. So I consider myself very lucky to have found this later in my life. Most of my life was as a business owner. We sold our company in 2015, and I was fortunate enough to become involved with the Veterans Hospital here and have been doing that since that time. Anything else you'd like to know?
Can you just kind of tell us a little about where you were born and grew up and what that was like?
I was born in Pendleton, Oregon. My father was a Western Union manager, lived pretty much in the Northwest most of my life, ended up at a relatively young age in Tacoma, Washington, was educated there, went to University of Puget Sound there, still have very close friends in the Northwest. Spent most of my personal early career with Weyerhaeuser Paper Company. Started in Tacoma, moved to Yakima, Washington, which by then was a time in my life when I was getting close to going into the service. Moved to Omaha, Nebraska in 1977, and I've been here ever since.
Do you have any siblings?
I have one older sister who is 11 years older than myself, still living in Tacoma, Washington.
Did they serve in the military at all?
I'm sorry?
Did your siblings or your parents serve in the military?
No, my father did not serve in the military because he was managing a Western Union and he was in the National Guard, and they wanted him to stay here. It is I guess my first interesting brush with the military was, and his first experience was taking telegrams to families from the military of deceased soldiers in World War II. That was in the 40s when I was born, and so he had a deep abiding respect for that, but they had to do a lot of that. That's when that was physically done. You got a telegram, you took it to the house. If it was an officer, officers came to the Western Union and took the telegrams to the house. Otherwise, they were just delivered by a Western Union messenger on a bike or perhaps a car.
You mentioned that you were married. Were you married before you went into the service?
I was married. My son was, well, the way I got in the service, I graduated from college, and I had just from friends in the Northwest, friends from our summer beach days, there was a gentleman there who was in a reserve unit. And I was good friends with his daughters, and he was a pretty cool guy, but comes to find out he's a staff sergeant, and he kept saying, "You ought to join the reserves, join my company," and I did. He said, "You know, you don't want to go straight to Vietnam. You really ought to think about joining my unit." And I thought, gee, can I do that? So I did. And so I was working with Weyerhaeuser in Tacoma, a good little job. And right after I graduated, I was given, having been working in the summers with Weyerhaeuser prior to graduating, I knew lots of people within the corporation, and all of them wanted to know if I wanted to come work for their divisions. And I thought, so I was fortunate back then, and jobs were pretty easy to come by. And I had one of the general managers was at corporate headquarters. Again, I thought was a really interesting guy. And he said, "Well, you ought to come to work for the shipping container division. Where do you want to go?" I said, "I don't know. Where do you want me to go?" And so I had opportunities in California. I had opportunities other places in the country, but I also had an opportunity in Yakima, Washington, which was close and where our families were. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do that. I'll take the job in Yakima, and I became a young sales rep and customer service rep in Yakima, Washington. And the problem was that I was commuting from Yakima to Olympia, where my first contact's company was. And that was, in the wintertime, that got a little difficult. And so there was a point I talked to him and I said, "This is really getting hard. I've got this new job. I'm in Yakima, Washington." And he said, "Well, why don't we transfer you to the firing center?" Yakima Firing Center. I said, "That would be good." And he says, "Let me make a couple of phone calls. I'll get you transferred. Be way easier on you. Hate to lose you, but I get it." And so Jack Kelly got me transferred to Yakima. The difference was that I went from a training unit in Olympia to a transportation company in Yakima, 737th Transportation Company. And no sooner did that transfer take place, within a few months, and the war is going on, and it's 1967, 68, all of a sudden our unit is frozen. And we thought, what does this mean? And sure enough, we found out what it meant in short order, that we were going to be activated. The unit was frozen. It was at full capacity. I think prior to that I'd been to one summer camp with them. Can't quite remember. But it was going to be activated, and we were all excited about, well, we'll probably replace some unit going to Vietnam because we're reserves. Not so much. We ended up getting called up. You guys are going to Vietnam. We didn't know where. We didn't know when. While I was there, we took basic training at Fort Lewis, Washington. Took AIT at a fort that no longer exists, Fort Ord, California. And I ended up with 2 MOSs. I ended up with a truck driver MOS. And then I was also informed that, guess what? You're not only going to Vietnam, but you're going on advance party. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we're gonna put 20 of you on a plane, and you're going to go about a month ahead of this entire unit. And we want you, you're going to help set up the bivouac where we're going to end up. I said, well, where are we going to end up? Well, we can't tell you that, but you're going to be on a plane. So in April, I'd have to literally go back and look at my form. They got our unit together. We went back over to Fort Lewis, which was Fort Lewis and McChord Air Force Base, and we left McChord. Very clear in my mind. Went to Anchorage, Alaska, Guam, Tokyo, I think down to Cameron Bay, something like that. And we were there, still didn't know where we were going. And all we knew was the next day was, you're going north. Well, okay. And it was, I guess one of my first memories goes back, and it's true, we've all seen the movie Platoon. I will never forget the door opening on the plane, and I might as well have been hit in the face with the heat of an oven. It just knocked me over, and I couldn't breathe. It was dusty, it was, oh my God, it was crazy. And that's a really early memory. And then they put us up overnight, and the next day we got on a plane and went to Da Nang, changed planes. You're still going north, and you're going to this little place kind of up by the DMZ called Dong Ha. And we landed on PCP about 5 clicks south of the DMZ. And still didn't know. I mean, I had no reference to what that meant at that point in time. They put us in Jeeps and drove us back down to our first area, where apparently we were going to get some area and set up our company, which was Quan Tri. We were right outside of Quan Tri. So that's about 11 miles south of Dong Ha.
There's a map there if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
To it.
Came in. Where's Cameron?
Right there by your pinky, yeah.
Here's Cameron. Went up to Da Nang, and we very well may, and then ended up. There's Dong Ha right up here, DMZ, Quan Tri right there, and that's where we lived for the rest of that year. In fact, I spent New Year's Eve on perimeter guard somewhere up there, the New Year's Eve of 1968. And we stayed up there. We got virtually a piece of jungle. And they said, this is where you're going to set up your camp. We're going to set up the tents. But nothing was there yet. So, but you guys start building. It'll all be here. I met some Seabees up there. I don't quite know how that happened, but we came with some supplies. One thing of which was, I don't know how many of you guys if you've seen that movie, The Greatest Beer Run Ever.
Yep.
We had a couple hundred cases of Oli with us, and so we had some beer, and we traded 50 cases of beer for a D9 cat for 2 days. And one of the things I was pretty good at was negotiating, and these guys cleared us a piece of land with that cat in no time at all. So we could build. Then our tent supplies started to come in, and we started building where our tents were going to be for about our company, which was a little over 200, and also started to lay out an area for a POL dump where they were gonna store bladders for fuel, because we were going to haul fuel. And that's my earliest memories of putting that together. And by the time the rest of the company got there, it was fairly much ready to go. And we served basically various bases that we'd go out to and take fuel. And I was both in supply and driving. It just kind of wherever they needed me that day. That's what I did. It didn't get interesting until we started getting rockets. It was not a lot of small arms fire. The perimeter got probed every once in a while, but it was nothing major. But I don't think any vet ever forgets the first bang slap of the first round that hits close to him. The first mortar that hits, or the first, if you're in that stuff. It wasn't, direct attacks or anything like that, but we took a lot of that. We ended up hauling a little bit of ammo, but mostly it was just fuel. And the drivers would go out every day. Back in the day, obviously nothing like today. It was the VC would find shells and bury them with a cap, and so the truck could get hit by, boom. A round would go off and blow the crap out of the bottom of the trucks, but they were reinforced anyway. Blow the wheels off, everything else. Guy would lose his hearing for a few days, but then he'd be back. Today it would take out 3 city blocks and kill everybody. So we just had to watch out for all the regular stuff. Watch out for scorpions, watch out for snakes, stay out of the jungle itself, and just kind of work it. But it was, as many vets have said, it was days of boredom, interspersed with intense activity out of the blue. And you just have to be ready for it. But once you heard it, and once it was in your head, you never forget it. So I just kind of lived through that experience. Am I doing okay?
You're doing great.
So far?
Great.
I think lots of things, we hadn't lost anybody. We'd lost some trucks. We hadn't lost anybody. And even the Purple Hearts that were in the unit were mostly for shrap and stuff like that. The rocket fire got a little intense and crazy, but not so much in Quan Tri. After I had a buddy that did get injured, my closest friend who just passed away a year ago. It's one of my closer memories. Pat got hurt, and it was a flesh wound to the head, and we sent him to the hospital to get sewed up, and every time it got sewed up and started to heal up, the heat and the humidity just wouldn't let it heal. He did that twice. They opened it up, the stitches, restitched it, bring him back. He spent a couple weeks later. It just kept getting worse. So after about 3 or 4 months up there, the doctors looked at him a third time and said, "You're going to Tokyo, bye." I didn't see him until after I got back. So that was difficult. We did handle the day-to-day pressure and boredom with some pretty good Vietnam black. That was all over the place. It was no big deal to smoke a little dope at night. But I wasn't a smoker. I was never a smoker. I hated it. Raw throat all the time. I was also, however, a drinker of scotch. And I could buy scotch for about $3.95 a bottle. Chevis.
Wow.
Yeah, it was nothing. So I would
Just a little bit.
Oh,
No, that's fine, right there.
you want me to take it off? I don't know.
No, well, if you do, just put it there where we could see it in the.
Okay, am I?
You're fine with it there, right there. We see your eyes a little.
So, those were, some of the more enjoyable things. The only thing we had to do for any kind of entertainment was watching movies at night. Can't even remember what they were. But that was pretty much how Quan Tri worked. I did one night get, wasn't anybody's fault. I got abandoned, or I got lost, I should say. I got lost in Quan Tri. We had been down to the city or right outside of the outskirts for something. I don't have a memory of how, honest to God, this all occurred, but I had to find my way out and find my way back to camp. I finally saw an Army truck and flagged it down and got back up to our base. And I'm going, man, I'm never doing that again, because that was not a fun place to be, a lone soldier that night. And I didn't have anybody chasing me or anything like that. But I thought, okay, I gotta get smarter about what I'm doing. After the end of the year, we got moved. We'd had a unit down in Fubai. They stayed there, and they said, we want you guys down in Chulai. So we ended up heading back down south to Chulai, and we spent the rest of our time there in support of other units. Up here, it was probably mostly 1st Air Cav. Oshaw Valley's right here. We called it the Oh Shit Valley. Caisson's right there. High Van Pass is up here. A lot of bad stuff. Most of the time, though, when the trucks were out, we always had dust off with us. We always had choppers pretty close by. Big unit of Huey gunships up there. Lots of base helicopters all over the place. But we ended up in Chulai. Stayed there. That was actually, again, better duty because we were right on the beach. Our unit was right off the beach, not very far. 83rd Medevac, a couple other cool units up there. The days when you're doing that, and so I was mostly on base. I was maybe off base, out on the roads, or back going to one of the supply areas maybe once a week. Continued to do the same thing, much bigger. Chulai was a way big base. That was my first experience VC to me. Before then, it had been, we had quad 40s, it was small arms fire. We weren't ever close to hand. That wasn't our role. But my first memory that's probably stayed with me the longest is Chulai got hit one night really seriously, and it lasted a while, even though we were not at the perimeter. But this odd experience, after the night, the word was out that they'd hung a lot of VC on the wire. You know, they were pretty much suicidal. They were coming no matter what. The next day, at some point, a buddy of mine in a truck were going, they had a really large PXBX at Chulai. And we went over in the morning for something. No idea what. Got out of the truck. Right over to my left, we were in a deuce and a half. Right over to my left, another flatbed deuce and a half pulls up, and it's just got slat sides. Ours, you know, had the canopy and everything else. This just had slat sides. I looked in the truck and I looked again, and there were 7 dead VC. I had no emotion whatsoever. I could have been looking at a dead dog or roadkill. I had no feeling, no emotion, no shock other than, God, look at that. And it went into the PX, did whatever we were going to do. When I left, it was gone. And they had just offloaded these human beings, and I didn't think of them that way. They were the enemy. And that has stayed with me my whole life. I don't feel bad about it. No more than I felt bad the first time we did get hit and I was taking shots at people. I don't know if I killed anybody or not because it wasn't hand to hand, but I knew I was a pretty good shot because I was an expert, supposedly. But it never bothered me to lower that weapon and try to kill somebody. Not in the least. It was me or them, and I've always felt that way. The same as I'd feel about if anybody threatened my family. I wouldn't blink an eye. I'll worry about what happens later, but I wouldn't blink an eye. I didn't blink an eye that day. And I didn't think about it after that for a very long time. Enjoyed our time at the beach, and it was just, then toward the end, our unit started getting replaced by RAs. But it wasn't all at once. It wasn't like we weren't just going to pick up and move this company at 200 and send it back to Yakima, Washington. It wasn't going to happen that way. But I chose to stay. They said, well, you can go early. No, can I just stay? I just want to stay with my best friends, and if they're staying another few weeks, just put me up for another few weeks. And that didn't bother me either. I guess interspersed with that at some point, I guess I'm backing up a little, but I took my R&R in Hawaii with my wife. Going back after that week in Honolulu was worse for everybody because you knew what you were going back to now. And I felt particularly bad for guys that were going straight back to their unit and were going to be right back out in the crap. And we knew a lot of guys that were LRPs. You're aware with long-range patrol guys? Mm-hmm. They knew what they were going back to. They weren't actually, you kind of get into this life though, and you do pick up a feel. You just kind of know. And it's like that sixth sense. You just kind of know. I felt crappy, just the separation anyway, but it was, that R&R wasn't as great as I would have thought it would be. I was different, she was different, and that was not an uncommon story. But I went back, served the rest of the time out in Chulai. Finally, a bunch of us in a unit, they kind of pulled us out like 15 at a time. You go this week, you go next week, and then by the X amount of time, and we'll all be back. But I got back, and I went back to Yakima, and I didn't have any desire really, other than to see Pat and a couple of close friends. I really didn't have any, and I went back to Weyerhaeuser and started traveling the country again, back to my job, and I immediately disconnected with all of it. And of course it was 1969. It was very unpopular. But I was in Yakima, Washington. It wasn't, I didn't get spat on, I didn't get yelled at. None of that ever happened to me, but what was really, for me, was the silence. Nobody wanted to know anything. Grew my hair back out, got my job back, got my sales car, and just went on with my life. I had, my company gave me, when I got home, hired me right back and then gave me 3 months off. At least one of the guys that been in the military says, just get your shit back together. Take a little time. Very smart on his part. And so we did. Went to Tacoma. My other experience back in country, I flew back and they flew me right back to Fort Lewis, Washington. I think I went almost on the same route I came over. Got to Fort Lewis, only time in my life I ever saw my dad cry, and I didn't know why. Come on, Pop, I'm fine, I'm good. Took me home, my wife had left a car in Tacoma, because that's where I grew up, right there by Fort Lewis and McCord. said, you know, Pam wants you to take this to Los Angeles. She had left with my son, with Peter, and gone to LA, where her parents lived. Cool. And I knew that. I mean, I was kind of, okay, I'm going to stay here, going to go get my favorite burger, see some of my buddies, get drunk. I guess the thing that caught me, and obviously PTSD, that acronym didn't even exist. It was, get off the plane, if you got any sidearms, if you do, give them to me, sign that piece of paper, bye. Somebody will be in touch. You're going back to your reserve unit, you know, got asked once about a field grade commission. No, I have no interest in any of that. I got a job, I got a wife, I got everything I need right here. And so I went home, but my dad knew he was looking at a different kid. I didn't think so. I stayed around for about a week before I left for LA doing my stuff. And I found out, or at least his first notice was, I was getting pissed off real easily about minor things. Minor civilian things. I didn't see it in myself. So before I left for California, and I've told this story to a lot of vets, I'm going to gather my thoughts here now, but he looked at me one day and he said, you know you're different. And I said, well, yeah, what do you mean I'm different? And he says, and he had some really interesting insight, but he says, this is kind of eating you up. I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, this is eating you up. And he says, and I had a pretty good dad. He says, you're never going to know why you're here. You're never going to know why you made it. And other people, not in our unit, but other people that you know didn't. Alan Carter down the street didn't last a week. Got off a chopper and got killed. A couple guys in our neighborhood had already died there. And he says, you're never going to know why you're here, and they're not. But he says, I'll tell you. He says, you can either let this continue to eat you up, and I don't like where you're going, or you can maybe look at this as the best confidence course you're ever going to go through. You have a choice to make. Make it. Turned away. Never said another word.
Wow.
Still gets to me.
Yes.
So,
It is very insightful, though.
Yes.
yeah.
It is I've never heard it said that way. And it is very insightful.
I had a lot of respect for my dad, who was orphaned at a very early age, raised himself pretty much from, his mom and dad were actually born in Los Angeles, and he brought himself up and was one of the youngest managers of the Western Union when he was at a very young age, and so I consider him in a lot of ways self-made, no breaks ever. Every break he got, he had to make for himself. But anyway, to finish that story, I got in a car and I said, I'm going to take the Pacific Coast Highway all the way down to LA. I'm not taking the interstate. I want to get over. I want to see the beauty. I want to go to the Oregon coast. It's gorgeous. And then I just want to go down Highway 1 as far as I can. And I did that for a couple of days, and I was loving it. And the weather was great. It was going to be like a 3.5 day trip to Los Angeles back in those days. And I got I got to the trees of mystery, the sequoia trees, the giant redwoods down there, and I'll never forget. And I'd been thinking a lot about my dad, and I was going, oh yeah, okay, whatever. You know, he had a good point. And I began to see some of the things that, okay, yeah, I guess I was kind of a jerk here and kind of there, and but I got to the trees of mystery one day, and out of the blue, this emotion came over me, and I broke down. I had to, just driving through those gorgeous redwoods, I pulled over, and I probably cried for 2 hours. It just, everything came out. And in retrospect, all these years later, that had nowhere to go. I had nobody to talk to. I had nobody that understood, and most everything you heard on the news or anything else was all bad. And so I wanted to be as far away from that as I could. And even when I finally got to LA, my in-laws didn't talk about it. My wife didn't talk about it. My son was just, I mean, he wouldn't know. They had a very nice home. We went out to dinner. We saw people, and nobody said a word about, oh, you just got back from Vietnam. No, nothing. I mean, it was just more, didn't exist. And so all of us that came back, you know, I mean, I've talked to a lot of non-vets that had really bad face-to-face experiences. Not so for me. It was nowhere to relate to, nobody to talk to. And when we finally got back, and my 3 months was over, and I went back to Yakima, Washington, and I got asked right away, well, do you want to go back out to the firing center? Do you want to stay back in the reserves? They're going to put the unit. I said, no, I'm done. I'm out. And I found myself from that point on disconnecting entirely. The other thing that I knew, and this was also where I did change, and the more that first year went by, and this has come through reflection, in all honesty, almost since I came back to the VA and started talking to other vets, and in retrospect, thinking about things, I so disconnected and disengaged from any and everything military. And I got to do that because I had my cool job back. I had my company car. I was traveling all over the country. It was easy to divorce myself of all of that. It just never occurred to me that one of the things that was happening, and I got promoted pretty fast, but when I went over, again going back, in many ways, I didn't like myself very much when I left. In also many ways, I didn't like myself a lot when I got back, but I had way more confidence. And my dad was right. I had more confidence in myself and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go in this big company called Weyerhaeuser, and I did it. I didn't tie that back to my service over there, but it was a confidence course for me. It was also, it was like the worst of times, the best of times. And my dad was right in saying, take the good out of this and think about it and see what you can make out of that terrible year. I don't know where I'd be if he hadn't set me down for 15 minutes and told me what he thought. And I have told that story to other vets think about what all the bad that overwhelms you, but think about what you did and accept the fact you're never going to know why you made it and why some of those other names on the wall that you know did not. No answer. It's not an answer. You just are. You know, somebody had their hand on my shoulder. So I guess that's all the serious stuff. There was also some really hilarious fun times and things we did. So, but that was, I guess, those are the things that if they're going to be captured, and there's good to be found, even in terrible times like that that were so misunderstood. So I feel blessed to be almost 80 and getting to still help vets every day. That to me is a true blessing, because I see young, old in the hospital every day, and I'm going, you know, that could be me, you know, and yet I get to help somebody get a ride home, or help a Gold Star mom or wife get their benefits that they wouldn't have, even though I'm not a VSO. Even if I can get them a ride in, it's just a little piece of the deal. So,
Did you want to share some of the fun stuff that you did?
oh, so the first fun stuff was before we left the States. We all knew we were going, and we left Fort Ord, and the last weekend,
Just keep everything there.
the last weekend we were there, see you, brother. One of the guys, we were AIT, and so we had the time off and the weekends off, and some of the weekends we got to go down to Carmel, which wasn't bad. We had a hitchhike, but we'd hitchhike down and hitchhike back. Last weekend, somebody said, I got some buddies up in San Francisco. I got family up there and some really good friends. Let's go to San Francisco. We thought, hell yes, let's go to San Francisco. We ended up at Haight-Ashbury, right down there. And honest to God, true story, pure dumb luck, over in Golden Gate Park, the Grateful Dead are playing. There's the Dead, 3 blocks from where we are. We walk over with our hairs all trimmed back, definitely military cut. We're in our civvies, and we walk over there, and I was never a big Dead fan, but what I remember, and it was, I mean, this was Flower Child season, and there's all these people running around, and there are big white 5-gallon buckets stuffed with cash being passed around this crowd. Stop the war. People are just throwing, all these poor, dirt poor people, well, maybe not, but I'm going, holy crap, you know, this end the war, stop the war. And it was nobody, oh, you look like, you know, none of that happened. So we just hung out watching the Dead for 2 or 3 hours, and then went and got drunk somewhere and stayed a couple nights, and had to go back to Ord before we came home. That was my first funny story. There weren't a lot of other ones until we kind of got locked in Quantree. But we used to, at night, we used to go to the kitchen and get a giant can, a 5-pound can of cashews. For some reason, they were big on cashews. To this day, I don't eat cashews. I swear to God. So we would, and they had these things, somebody out there will know these, we'd roll up this grass that we had cut and prepped, and we called them Nook Mows. And you could pass that around to your whole platoon. And it was serious shit. I mean, you could sit up there, and we'd kind of sit on the top of a hooch, and we'd just kind of fly, have a good time. We'd go up, backing up when we were still up in Dong Ha. You could watch the B-52s bomb, and you would sit back, and it would be still as anything. And another memory is you'd look off and say, watch that, just watch out there. And there would be this electric blue arc. But all you'd see is the light. and then 20 seconds later, whoomp, you could feel it.
Wow.
You could feel it. Jesus, those are 52s up there. They're bombing right at the DMZ. And then we also got to see the miniguns and the Jolly Green Giant and all those planes with their miniguns up there firing down and just be snaking to the ground in red, tracers coming down, but it looked like one line, and you just hear this brrr, and we'd watch them once in a while up there in the same area. They'd be out there bombing close to the trailer. They'd have the word was out that they would normally, somewhere in between the trail and Dong Ha and heading toward Quan Tri, out there, that there'd be units trying to come down. Boy, they'd hit the crap out of those guys. And First Air Cav was up there. They were a lot of Cobra gunships. They were pretty, nobody wanted to mess with them. That wasn't necessarily funny, but it was shocking. You know, those kind of images I still have in my head.
Yes, absolutely.
Every day. The other fun thing I got to do once, which was probably the stupidest thing I ever did, I had a friend down in Saigon. She was a good friend of mine, nothing serious, but she was with one of the government units, and she got assigned to Saigon. And through college friends that we had, we both found out each other was there. Well, she got orders cut for me to go to Saigon for a weekend. And so I got on a slick one day and flew me all the way down to Saigon. The funny thing was, this is how stupid you are. I chose to sit next to the door gunner. Guy says, "You want to sit here?" "Oh God, that would be cool." You know, so I strap in across me. He's got his 50s. And he says, "Just sit there, don't do anything." And this guy was whipping around, and we were actually, we weren't going over jungle. We were pretty damn near the coast all the way down, so it wasn't anything bad. But yeah, I decided to sit next to the door gunner. And that was a great weekend. We stayed there in the city for 2 nights with her, and there was gunfire at night in Saigon. I didn't get to see as much of Saigon as I wanted, and then I got whatever she'd gotten this paperwork ready for me to take back up north to Chu Lai, so I took it back with me and rode off the weekend as just a little free trip. So that was a lot of fun. Other than that, I'm sure there's things that every once in a while some memory pops into my head that I haven't thought about in a long time. I'm just grateful today that I am able to help the vets I can. Oh, I did. See, just like that, I did remember one more funny thing. So unfortunately, it's back to marijuana again. We had a guy in our company that was a farmer. I didn't know him real well, but he decided, obviously he couldn't run around the company smoking dope, even then, but it grew everywhere. It was everywhere. So he decided to make his own chaw. He was a red man guy, but he got and dried out and kept wet, and had a little culture area, got the best leaf, and he made a chaw out of it, and he kept it heated, and he says, "It's going to take me about 30 days to do this right." And he cut this stuff up. I wasn't ever going to chew that stuff. But so when we did have formations and stuff, and he was in a motor pool, and you'd go over there, and he'd Walt Garris a little pinch between my cheek and gum, and he'd just be happy as a clam, loaded.
Great tobacco flavor.
Now that's
lighten up.
It's really funny. Now that's creativity, and he just carried it around in his Red Man pouch. Swear to God. that was, the little things like that make you laugh. But, you know, for the most part, the friends that I had, many in our unit, never, ever went back and wouldn't. I went to our 50th reunion, and Pat, my friend, was alive then, and he got a trailer and moved to Coulee City, Washington, this little burg in the farthest reaches of northeast Washington you can imagine. In fact, Coulee City, because it's the city that was built for the workers that built the Grand Coulee Dam. And married, a couple of kids, but was never, our lives, I think about this a lot still, he never got control of it again. He told me his whole life, I was the only guy he'd talk to in the company. He wouldn't talk to anybody.
Wow.
He said, I was the only person he wanted to see. It took me almost 25 years to find him and for him to find me. And that was a fluke.
Wow.
So I went to the 50th reunion of our company going over and saw a lot of guys I hadn't seen in a very long time. And there was this group that were still together, not reliving the war, just wanted to be together. They grew up in Yakima, they were still there. But a lot never did a thing. I begged and pleaded with him for the whole weekend I was with him. Come on, let's do this, I'll be right with you. No way, that's my line, I won't do that. You can come out here and stay anytime you want for as long as you want, but I'm not doing that, I'm done. He ended up passing, he was 100%. I don't know, 3 kinds of cancer, but he never was able to grab on again. And I felt terrible because he was really a talented guy, great musician, a little bit of an edge, but it was a really good edge. And then his wife, Kitty, whom I'd known, you and I talk about Dana, but Kitty was, after Pat passed away, called me up, terrified, went to Yakima to find out about benefits transfers, and was told that they couldn't help her. And that's impossible. There's a benefits transfer. He's 100%. Of course there's something. I don't know how much, but there's something. We did it here in Nebraska. The VSOs here, Jamie and a group there did the whole thing. The one smart thing she had done, she had very good records of all of Pat's issues. And the VSOs here, it took a long time, took the VA a time, but I'm very happy that I was able to get Pat's wife everything she deserved, finally.
Good.
From nothing to fairly decent amount. Those guys are very good at what they do. So, but anyway, I digress. But that's kind of my story, cool. and I get to kind of still live part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I consider myself really lucky, and very happy I took my dad's advice.
Yeah, that was very good advice. And you took the time to let it out.
Yeah.
If you could leave a message for future generations, what would you want to tell them?
For future generations, save this country. It's the only one like it, and we're in the process of losing it. And we need to be patriots. And we need to get back to the values that got us where we are. And we're quickly losing all of them. Stay strong, keep yourself strong, and do everything you can, because if we lose this country, you're going to lose everything you ever thought you had. Amen.
Amen.
Yes. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
No, I think not. I'll probably think of something when I walk out the door, but
Well, thank you very much for your time and your service.
you are most welcome. My honor.